covered up my camera too. I'm totally gonna jib it.
Well, if you do, I will.
Okay, good. In solidarity, we will jib it.
We will. We'll just be. I'll just go. "Whoa." I'll just get mad at you and like smack the camera, and then we'll just be done.
I just want to rip the band-aid off, when we first get started. I feel like it'll go better. All right. All right. Hey, everybody. How you doing? Welcome to another edition of Cultural Arts at a Distance. We're coming at you live via the Edwards College. I'm your host today, Alexandra Knox, and today we are going to be interviewing Easton Selby. Hi, Easton. Hey.
Hey, it's very
Hi.
strange. This is now we're on opposite sides.
I know, yeah, we're totally turning the camera around on you. If you've all been following along, you'll know that Easton has really been the one asking the hardball questions and throwing people for loops left and right. But yeah, now we're switching around. We're not really switching lenses because everybody has a lens looking at them because we're streaming. Anyways, so yeah, today we're gonna be talking about Easton's work. So just to give you a little bit of a bio and a background on Easton, he is a photographer and educator based out of Conway, South Carolina. His work explores the history and culture of the American South. Currently, he is the Associate Dean in the Edwards College of Humanities and Fine Arts here at Coastal, and he's also a professor of photography. His work has appeared in publications such as Delta Magazine, Canadian Art Magazine, Metropolis Magazine, and he is the 2008 recipient of the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Award for Photography. So wonderful bio you got there. So also, as I'm talking to Easton, we would love to hear any questions or comments that you guys have. You can go ahead and post those in the Facebook comments or in the YouTube comments box as we're streaming. So Easton, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Well, thanks, Alex.
Yeah, hey, anytime. So
Also, real quick,
yeah,
Alex was interviewed 2 weeks ago.
was it only
Alex,
2 weeks
I think it
ago?
was 2 weeks ago, and you're the assistant chair for the department, no, associate chair for the
Associate
Department of
chair.
Visual Arts, and you teach sculpture. If
I
anybody's
do.
interested in Alex's conversation, you can find that on the college's YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, Easton and I work in the same department, and so we've been working together for, I guess, 6 years now. But yeah, so this is going to be fun. Anyways, can you begin by telling us like why and how you got into photography in the first place? And I guess we'll talk about your work after that.
Yeah, sure. That's easy. So I've been in art and music almost my entire life. And so it's been, when I started college, I started as a music major. I played tuba, which is kind of strange, but that's what I did. I played tuba. And so I was that guy with the giant, horn that was like wrapped around the body. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. And then, but I also was an art major in college too. I had a scholarship for both. And at some point, I had to make a decision about which direction I wanted to go. I was burned out on music, and I decided to go art because I had a general interest in graphic design. And I had an uncle who was in advertising, and he told me that if you want to go the direction of design, you really should consider taking a photo class because you have to learn to be able to have a conversation with somebody from the opposite side. So while you come from the same areas of expertise, arguably, the vernacular is very different. So I took a photo class. I also took a lot of design classes, and I realized I really hated sitting in front of a computer. Ironically, we're in front
I
of a
was, I was about to say,
yeah,
I won't say ironically, but yeah.
it is maybe, I don't know. But anyway, so I fell in love with the camera, and I thought the camera was really interesting. For me, it was interesting because it got me out of the house. And so I didn't like sitting in an office. I didn't like sitting in a chair. I liked being out. And there was something really interesting about the concept of photography from a point of observation. And I found that through photography, I gained a better understanding for the world around me rather than sitting and clicking and doing things. And so, which is strange because at that time, photography was primarily film based. And now photography is like a real mix of both film is seeing a resurgence, and then it's also digital too. So my work flexes between film, digital, things like that. So I mean that's sort of how I found photography. And then I went to graduate school, and now I'm here.
And can you tell us where you went to graduate school? I did not mention your accolades in terms of your education.
Yeah, I did my Bachelor of Fine Arts at Delta State University in Cleveland, Mississippi. And then I did my graduate work. I got an MFA in visual art from Clemson University.
Excellent. Um, so, and you, if I'm not mistaken, you also almost got a minor in sculpture, isn't that right?
Yeah, I ended up with a minor in drawing. I made a decision that at some point, like I was working towards sculpture, and then I was thinking about, what is going to add to photography a little bit more. And for me, drawing actually helped me become a better photographer, because I had to be able to translate something that was three-dimensional into a two-dimensional realm.
Mhm.
And it was the drawing professor at the time, Collier Parker, who really helped me through that understanding of, like, the darkness and the light, and then how things function in the round. I will say that sculpture really helped me understand three dimensions too. That, how we sort of see and understand the round. That also translated back to drawing and then into photography.
Interesting. So it's funny that you're like you chose between a path between drawing and sculpture because that's I'm familiar with your work and everybody else will be here will be too pretty soon. But like you've not only done photography, you're becoming you could argue that you're kind of a multimedia artist and you're utilizing objects. You're not only photographing those objects, you're also using them in the body of work. And so I think it's really fascinating that sculpture has really kind of come full circle for you and has entered back into your body of work for Conjure.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I have to say that I sort of found that space through one of my previous professors, Pat Brown. She taught fibers in my undergrad. She's now retired, but I found it really through book arts, and I found book arts this really interesting space. That, I mean, if you look at like what contemporary book arts is, like it's very sculptural. And
Hmm.
so it's not, most people have the traditional understanding of what a book is, just it's a book. Like you open it up, it's hardbound, paperback, or whatever. But book making is far more sculptural than it is. Type becomes almost secondary in book arts now.
Right, yeah. And I think that's another interesting aspect as we approach talking about Conjure. And I would like to, my next question is about your process and your and how that plays into your research. But books and because I feel like that is a huge component to your body of work, Conjure, in terms of your research. And so I'm going to ask you to talk about, can you talk about your creative process and your approach to research, specifically about Conjure? And maybe this is a good time to maybe bring up the work so that we can start
Yeah.
kind of visualizing.
Yeah, cool. So I will share my screen and we'll go here. Can you see it all right?
I sure can. Looks
Sweet.
great.
Cool, thanks. This is brand new. I just put it up last night after almost 6 years of an old website. Anyway, all right. So let's talk about process just a little bit. So, as a photographer, like there's a lot of nuance to photography. I think that is kind of interesting. There are a lot of photographers that are out there that are very journalistic in their style. There are photographers that are very commercial based. There are photographers that are fine art based, and there's very little. And then you also have academic photographers. I'll put them in their own category.
Mhm.
And so I've never really liked those boundaries. I've found them not very helpful in my practice. I think that my undergraduate education with both Kim Rushing and Kathleen Robbins, both photo professors. Delta State's program was very documentary based, and its understanding of the image and the photograph. That's Kim Rushing's tutelage, I would say. And so the way I approach work is from a documentary style. And then I sort of found the opposite side of that in graduate school with Sam Wong on the fine art side. So I am very haphazard in my process where my work flexes between both areas. It's very bipolar, and in the sense that, I go from one to the other, and I will drop one for the other depending on circumstances and need. And so my process it does include research. It does include a lot of experimentation. It does include a lot of failures and in some cases successes. So I know that today we're talking about Conjure, which is an ongoing body of work of mine. That's, just to be fair, I've literally been working on this work since about 2006. And it's been a really long time with a lot of exploration, a lot of failures, in some cases heartbreak, because like stuff just doesn't really come to fruition the way I want to. And so, but you know, that is what it is. So anyway, so I discovered, if we're talking about process and how I function, back, you know, I think it was 2004, I found a series of books by Harry Middleton Hyatt. It was a 5-volume series called Hoodoo, Voodoo, Witchcraft. And I don't remember the full title of the series, but it was a 5-volume set at about 1,000 pages per volume that went into Harry Middleton Hyatt's research into practitioners of hoodoo, voodoo, conjure, witchcraft, Santeria, things like that. And it was a first base account of like process. And it was more about how the process functions, because it's something that it's both religious, but it's also magic. But the large majority of his research happened in the Southeast. And I'll be honest, I grew up in Mississippi. Mississippi is a strange place. It's an interesting place. It's also beautiful. But I've seen a lot of weird stuff. Like, I'm a photographer. I go out, I wander around, I get lost. Like, getting lost is very important to me, like geographically, because, you know, you find more interesting things if you get lost, if you don't follow a map, if you will. And so, like, growing up, going to New Orleans, like Mississippi Delta, you know, just different travel, and even South Carolina, I've just seen a lot of strange stuff. So something really stuck with me with this body of work, or more Harry Middleton's research about understanding more about the process of the magic. And I mean, there's a lot of debate. I mean, the history of photography even goes into, like, you know, photography was considered magic at one point. Because, you know, you're taking this, you know, this metal, whether it's silver or platinum or something else, and exposing it to light, and then an image shows up. Everybody's like, oh my God, like, how did this happen? Like, you know, is it science? Is it magic? What is it? So,
Totally. Yeah, I mean, that's like low-key magic.
yeah. So anyway, so Conjure is a body of work that, when I discovered Harry Middleton's work, I was already sort of interested in the concept of voodoo, which is based down in New Orleans. And I went on a trip to Charleston as a graduate student, and I found a book, and I met a book called Blue Roots. And then I also talked to somebody that was a practitioner of hoodoo that I randomly ran into. It was just like this weird circumstance, and we started chatting. So I started doing a lot more research into the practice, because I didn't understand the difference between voodoo and hoodoo. So the work has evolved over the years, where, you know, the work was very heavily object oriented, as in, like, the photograph became an object. Like, I actually think you have one of the pieces at your house where it was coated in encaustic, was altered, like all of these things. Like, it was more than just a photograph at that point. And so at one point I was out photographing, lost in the woods, and I came across an actual hoodoo poppet. The person I was photographing with actually found it. I was very confused about what they found. But I was at the border of Mississippi and Alabama, which is really strange. And the poppet is in this series, and you'll see the photograph in a minute. But that really got me thinking about the work again, because at one point I had an exhibition of this body of work, an early version of it. I deemed that body of work a real failure, because it didn't come to fruition like I expected it to. And a lot of that was, I don't think I really understood the place of where it was coming from internally, like on my side of things. So when that poppet sort of popped up again, I'd been doing a lot of documentary work at the time. And it brought me back around to this place, which is this work. And it really spawned, like, the growth within this. So the work incorporates both physical objects, or poppets, black and white work, which is the actual practice of black and white magic, and then there are color landscapes that are almost sort of a mental place for me, giving context to place, or like grounding me in a place or a location. So it's like a wide expanse of work that a lot of times in fine arts, or specifically photography, people don't like the idea of too much, narrow the focus. And so, I mean, there's debate that this is actually three bodies of work in one rather than one cohesive body, because they do feel very separate.
Hmm. I can see, I mean, I see the relationship between the objects, the mystery of the objects. And when you talk about seeing strange things growing up in the Deep South, I think about like pop culture references to the Deep South. I'm a big movie buff and I love films. And so I think of like films like Angel Eyes, which is a really kind of like obscure film about I think hoodoo and or voodoo. I'm not well versed in it, but you associate that kind of like thick landscape, that lush landscape, like what you photographed here, that humidity, the sweatiness, I don't know. I mean, and it's gorgeous, but it's also absolutely mysterious and unspoken in a lot of ways. So, um, and it looks like I don't know. I love the relationship between the lushness and the color schemes that you have going in your color photographs versus the value changes that you have in your black and white photographs.
Thanks. Yeah, and if you have questions about it, just let me know, and then we can stop and focus on some specific photographs if you want.
Yeah, I mean, so let's because I'm sure a lot of people that are watching, or maybe they don't have any knowledge related to hoodoo or voodoo. So let's pick one of these. Actually, first, can you define what a poppet is for our audience? What is the purpose of a poppet?
Yeah, so let's just go down. Let me see. Where is the actual? There's the poppet. That's the original. That's the poppet that I found. It's over here on the right.
And it has that pin in it, like that you found it with that pin?
Yes. Yeah, I didn't. This is unaltered. It's on fabric, but it's an altered piece. So a poppet in hoodoo culture is also called a doll baby. And so the doll, or I mean, it comes in a variety of terms and names, but they're made with, in some cases, felt. So, and it's usually two colors of felt. It's red and it's green. They both have symbolic meaning. The poppet is used as a representation of another person, and like an individual will go to a practitioner, like hoodoo priest, priestess, practitioner, someone that is connected, and they will say, look, either I need help, family member needs help, etc. So here is something that's symbolic of that individual. And, the practitioner will make the poppet in the form of the person. It will be stuffed with a variety of different things, be it, I mean, it could be hair from the person, it could be herbs. Like the herbs are probably very specific to the need and the want of like the magic that's being requested. And the pen, which this is in black and white, there's a pen that's sort of stuck in the side of this poppet. The pen is actually a white head. Sometimes they have different colors, and the different colors have symbolic meaning, depending on like the actual need. And so with this one, like I can only speculate that it seems like it could have been, appendicitis. It could have been anything, because the white is supposed to be also healing.
Okay.
And so, but it was really strange because like when a poppet is done, when it's seen and gone through its process, like it's meant to be discarded and disposed of. And so, which means it's supposed like its magic is done, it's run its course, and it moves on. So, should I have taken it from its place? Probably not.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah. But, I kind of looked at it as, I'm going to say like an omen. Like it's not like this already had a general interest of mine. It would have been one thing to actually just run across it and ignore it. But when I saw it, I was like, man, okay. Like I really would like to throw some expletives out there as just, my mindset at the time. But I was like, I don't like, why is it that I'm here right now and literally in the middle of nowhere, had been driving down dirt roads and probably roads that should not be driven down. And I found this thing out in the middle of the woods. So I took that as an omen. I grabbed it, I stuck it in a bag, and it's in my studio. And I reference it I go back to it periodically because it's such a fascinating object to me that I couldn't leave it behind, if
Hmm.
that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would feel tempted to also kind of just grab these things, especially if that's what you're initially interested in the first place.
Hmm.
Um, so so this is the original poppet that you found that kind of really like, would you say that this kind of uh, was the start of a renewed sense of this body of work? This kind of set you in that direction again? Because I know you said you started this body of work back in 2004. It's been ongoing for a while.
Yeah, so I think that the several things happened like, in my head when I saw it on the ground, when I actually got to go look at it, because I was taking a different photograph, like I was facing a different direction. And I came back and I looked at it. It was really like the landscape circulating us, like really drove home, and it reinforced like the color work that was developing or not developing that I developed around this body. And so like in my head, I visualized like a photograph of the poppet on the ground. I didn't have what I needed with me to get the photograph that I really wanted to capture that because I thought about actually just photographing in its space
Mhm.
and then walking away. And then in my head, I couldn't rectify or reckon with like what I needed to get out of it. So I decided to take it with me. But I took mental notes of the landscape that was really encompassing me and encompassing us. And that sort of, for me, like really put the body of work into a different place, whether it's the mind's eye, whatever you want to call it. Like it really started to like formulate and solidify the concept of the body of work behind it.
Yeah, and something else about the landscape photos as you're looking at them are they're just so they really make you feel as the viewer, they give you a sense of scale, right? Like you feel dwarfed by this and consumed with it. And so I think you feel like there's something else that's bigger than you are, which to me is also what I get from the hoodoo, voodoo, the specifically hoodoo in this instance, that it's something beyond like a physicality or a person
Mhm.
in and of themselves. So yeah, so here's the physical poppets that you made. So you hand stitched these.
Yep.
Can you talk about the relationship between these objects versus the objects that you actually photographed?
Yeah. So I think that one of the aspects of this is I thought that since like the found poppet was so important to my process, that I started really thinking about the physicality of a poppet in general and how fascinating they are. Because, as a kid, I remember going into like voodoo stores in New Orleans and being fascinated by these really like it's almost cliche voodoo dolls that you'll find. Like, I mean, you can buy them on the internet on keychains and things like that now. But like what I found was like it was real. Like it's
Yeah.
the real thing. Like this isn't fake. This isn't something that was like bought off of a shelf. Like this was handmade. And I really started thinking about the process of the magic, be it white or black magic, because that's important to this. That with the poppet, like the poppet became handmade, and like since like the body of work started developing as my understanding of the black magic, the white magic, hoodoo, the landscape around me, like things that have influenced me throughout my time. Like I started thinking about individual people, and so every one of these poppets is legitimately about a person. Like it's somebody that I know. And so when I started, doing more of the diving into the research and understanding and asking questions about poppets, what I found is a lot of this stuff, a lot of, the magic behind poppets is interpreted in a variety of different ways. And so these are like my interpretation of a poppet. So for example, like a traditional poppet has felt on two sides, generally green, generally red, blue is in there sometimes depending. But what I decided to do is I used a printable fabric that I could take images that are associated with those individuals. And I printed images on the fabric, cut them out in the shape of the people, and then hand stitched them together. Like even the color, the binding, the stitch, like that color is very specific for a reason. In what they're stuffed with, like the names of people are in these actually. Um, and then when I started thinking about the use of the poppet, puppets are supposed to have a finite lifespan and, anyway, but, from the creative perspective, like I could photograph them, but I find the object far more interesting than just taking a photograph of it. Like, I think it works for the original, but it doesn't function well for this one. And so what I've done is like they're sort of encapsulated or entombed in these jars, and they're bound in wax at the feet. And so like the wax is, it's a mixture of multiple waxes that are supposed to resist heat and melting unless at higher temperatures. And so my thought was, when these poppets have seen their end, all I do is I heat the wax, melt the wax, and then pull the body from its entombment and then discard it.
So do these people know, have you told anybody that there's a poppet made about them, or are they totally not, do they not know? Have you told anybody that you've made, hey, I made a poppet about you or for you?
One person knows, and they know which one is theirs because they walked in and they said, I bet that one's about me.
And you said, I guessed right.
Yeah, I did.
Right.
So, yeah. And actually, I just noticed that he's watching. So hi, Tim Hodge.
That's who I would.
Yeah.
Do you think that the poppets, the physical poppets, can function on their own as, like, without the photographs, just as objects in a space? Or do they need those photographs to help inform their, I don't know, their existence or their...
So these are photographed specifically for my website. Mm-hmm. And I placed them here for our conversation, and they'll probably live here until I decide to take them down, I guess. But the, the poppets I've exhibited this work a couple of times in like multiple forms, like they've taken on different forms. And so the poppets do go to exhibits, and they are in their physical shape. There are no photographs of them. So they're meant to be encountered. And I do think that, and I have, like, some people have told me that when I talk about me finding the poppet in the woods and like the strangeness associated with it, people have a very similar reaction to seeing the physical poppet in the space, because I get the questions, are these really about people? Like, these are people, do they know that this is about them? And I answer, they don't. Am I going to tell them? Probably not. And so people find it very strange because like their encounter with it is something that's really taboo. It's like, what are you doing, man? Like, this is not normal. So, and I'll add to the not normal, the jars travel with graveyard dirt. Like, that's actual dirt from a graveyard. Mm-hmm. And they're entombed with it as like an air of protection.
So where does you don't necessarily practice hoodoo, right? Like on a regular basis.
No, not on a regular basis.
Not on a regular basis. But how do you navigate how do you navigate the role of and the artist and documentarian, like as you research and photograph these cultures, like this specific culture, and you said it's not a religion, right? Like, this is not a religion, it's a practice.
So
where do you fit into this?
So, okay, I think I know where you're going. I think
it's
so. One, hoodoo really incorporates. It does have like Christian elements to it, but it is the practice of magic, and hoodoo is very specific to the Low Country, so North Carolina down to Georgia, and it comes from Africa. It came over with. I mean, if we're gonna be honest, it came with slave culture to the East Coast. And then the voodoo came through the Gulf, and it came through Haiti and another part of Africa too. So what we're talking about is something that is culturally not my own. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where you're going.
Yes.
So, so how do I fit into that? I don't know. And so I can say that I have forever been interested in something that is not me. I think that I think appropriating this almost practice of religion, but there are also people that are white practitioners. There's a great story, and I think it's actually true, or it is true, that there was a sheriff down off of St. Helena who was also a practitioner as well. And so a white sheriff. And I actually think one of our former students, Brant Barrett, knows him or knew him. And so, but he was a practitioner along with, oh gosh, his name totally escaped me, but like the original, oh gosh, I can't believe I just forgot his name. Like the practitioner that was on St. Helena as well.
Okay.
Dr. Buzzard, I believe. So yeah, so this is something that I came across and I honestly just started exploring on my own. I was super fascinated by the process. I was super fascinated by the idea, the iconography, the ideology, like all of it around it. And so, outside of just, this is my exploration of it, I think that's what it is, or where it is. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's like a hard answer for it necessarily. I mean, you grew up in the deep South. You grew up around this. It was surrounding you anyways. And while you may not have been directly involved in it as a practitioner, it's hard to ignore those things as you grow up around them. And I think, it seems to me like nature versus nurture, and like how your environment shapes who you are as a person and what you're interested in. I think that may have a lot to do with it. And it's not that I don't know if you're necessarily like appropriating this. You were most certainly documenting it. And I think it seems to me it's common for many, we'll just keep going with photography since it's so documentary based at times, that it's very easy for like white photographers or white documentarians to be documenting cultures outside of their own. And
Well, that's part of its history
of photography.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that certainly rings true, even now. So I was just curious, like how you felt like you fit into this. If you're telling a story of your own, it seems like it's very autobiographical in a lot of ways because it's from your perspective and it's about your upbringing and
Yeah.
geographical location.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to also discuss like the conceptual aspects of this. You're talking about how you compared this to a layer cake and how there's multiple layers in this body of work. And a couple of the layers that you talked about were the curiosity, exploration, observation, the understanding and knowledge, and then collecting. So can you kind of talk about that in terms of like how this work was conceptualized in the first place?
In 2004 or in 2000, whatever.
What?
Older.
Let's do the newer one.
Yeah, I think that if we're talking about the conceptualization and like how I came to it, I have probably 6 sketchbooks of notes in a variety of forms and then research. So like one of the hard parts of this process has been, what is what is within limits and what is outside of the limits of, my work.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that in conceptualizing this, it became experimentation to begin with. It was, all right, well, let's look at the practice. Let's do the research. Like, what are the key elements here that are within the practice of the magic, both black and white? And, what are things that are relevant to me? And then, what is, relevant to the world that's around me? So, and I started thinking about the landscape more. I started thinking about the poppet, the environment in which I found it, circumstances around it. And then, as like the work started sort of growing and, sort of manifesting into what you see now,
Mm-hmm.
there was a literal come to Jesus moment where, and I'm going to attack Tim Hodge again, because this is his fault. It's not his fault. Not his fault. But he and I have been sidebar collaborating on another large project, Delta Walk, which is also on my website. But Tim was in town because I believe we were about to actually leave on like a multi-week documentary trip and to work on Delta Walk down in North Mississippi. But he asked me, he said, all right, because my house was totally encased in all of this stuff. Like it was everywhere. Poppets were everywhere. Like materials were everywhere. And Tim walked in and said, what's going on? And I was like, well, this is what I'm working on. This is what I'm doing. And he said, so what haven't you done? Like, what is this? What haven't you done that you just like, that's not, cause I was talking to him about how some of this was not coming together for me conceptually. Like I was struggling with like how to bring all of the work together. And he said, he asked me the big question, like, what haven't you done yet? And I said, honestly, I haven't done the black magic yet. And he was like, well, what's stopping you? I was like, fear.
Yeah, that's a good reason.
And so like, and I will add that, the image that we're looking at right here, I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to throw Chrissy under the bus here. Chrissy being my wife. We were already talking about getting married. We were having that conversation and she said, am I interested in having a kid? And I said, not possible. I was told that I can't. And I was thinking about an image, and in my head, I had this image of cicada shells, right? And it's because cicadas are very much the South. Mm-hmm. And like finding them everywhere. I remember growing up as a kid, finding them like encasing trees in our backyard. So I had this idea of like a physical form of a human because the cicadas attached to trees and trunks and other things. And I thought I had this image in my head of what we're looking at. Like this is what I actually saw in my head. Mm-hmm. Upon further research after the fact of making this image, cicadas are a form of like rebirth.
Like fertility?
Fertility, yeah. And in a strange bit of irony, it wasn't long after I made this photograph that Chrissy was like, hey, I'm pregnant. And I said, no, you're lying. So anyway, so there's that general fear of like, okay, well that happened. So is this like in my head? Am I making this up? Like, where does this work? Like there's that kind of fear. Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, so the image that we're looking at right here is a landscape. It's one of the few landscapes that are in black and white within the work because the other work focuses on objects very specifically. It's about sort of either work in practice or in process, if you will, the process of the magic. But this one is very different. It's one of the most different ones of the bunch because we decided as a group, and I say group because there were two other people involved, that we were going to do what we could to summon Satan, the devil, right? In the folklore of the American South, like there is an amazing story in blues culture about Robert Johnson selling his soul to the devil at the crossroads. Yes. And how he did it, what he did, the process for it. And in all of my research, the devil has a thing and really loves silver. So to summon the devil, you actually take a pure silver fork, you put it at midnight in the middle of the road, and you recite something very specific, and that will summon him to you to like make something happen, like whatever your needs are. I'm not gonna lie, we made it to 11:58. And a massive storm hit, like massive storm, to the point where my friends that were with me, all of us generally have very little fear of things. And we had probably $30,000 of equipment that was there because this process was also being filmed. So there's actually film, audio of everything around what was going on. And we had to leave. And so because we were going to get stuck and it was going to be bad, because it was a huge storm. And so this was the shot that I got before we actually got to finish the process. So that's as far as we got. So I didn't meet the devil. So
okay. So long story short, you're like, we got to go. There's a storm.
It was bad. It was nasty. So yeah, it was one of those where anyway. But, I did an exhibition and a lecture once where I told that story and somebody walked up to me and said, that was divine intervention, right? Like that prevented you from doing that. So I was like, well, I don't know. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's what's like amazing about some of these stories is, not the stories, the photographs, is that there is a story with it. So let's talk about can we look at the snake skin? Can you talk a little bit about that piece?
Yeah. So, this one, I mean, this one doesn't have as much of a good story to it. The snake plays a large role within a lot of this process, specifically skin and the skin of the snake. And so this has to do, like this one it's titled Luck because that's the spell. So the titles of these pieces, which are not on the site, are very specific to the process. I try to give as much information as possible to like garner interest by the viewer. So like the image next to it is actually High John the Conqueror root, which is used dominantly throughout the process of hoodoo. It is also sort of an agent of luck. And in some cases, the snake is an agent of luck. It depends on use and need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you have any other good stories that go along with any of these photographs? I mean, the pregnancy one's pretty good. Oh, look.
There's the
About
follow-up.
8 months later.
Yeah, that was the follow-up to it. So,
or they said fallout.
no, it's not. It's just a follow-up. So, yeah. And so anybody that has questions, we haven't gotten any questions. So maybe there's no interest in this. But if there's any questions, please let us know.
Yeah.
Here's the fork that we used. It's actually, what's funny is it's very hard to find a pure silver fork these days. Everything is silver plated.
Mm-hmm.
But I found a pure silver bacon fork. And so it was new to me. That was my argument because it was supposed to be new. But the pure silver bacon fork was used at the crossroads. And so I kind of figured in my head, I was like, well, it's new to me. So I've got a semantic argument against the devil. It's a bacon fork. Who doesn't like bacon? So if the devil wants nothing to do with me because I've used a new to me silver bacon fork, I don't need the devil.
That's right. Maybe his standards are too high.
Yeah.
So all of this, I'm going back to like these notes that I have based on the layers of this, and there's like this element of collecting objects and how the materiality and the hoodoo is very object oriented. And so you're finding these objects and then collecting them and then photographing them. What have you learned from this body of work by making this body of work?
That I have an incredibly difficult time writing an artist statement about it. I mean, that's it. Like I keep making, like I don't stop making. Like right now I have notes about new images that I'm going to add to it. At what point is this work going to end? And I don't know. And so like for me, like I struggle writing about it. Like I can talk about it, but there's so many facets to it that I struggle to condense it.
Right.
And so like we tell our students that all the time that an artist statement needs to be anywhere from X number of words to this many one page. Really, it should be max. But, I struggle to get one page and do it effectively. Mm-hmm. And so I really honestly hate one-page artist statements. I think that's almost too long. Mm-hmm. And, there's like, if you can't sum it up, then, either you're not doing it right or it's just like gibberish to a degree. That's debatable. Everybody has opinions about that. And so there are definite benefits to one-page statements, which this one hasn't. Like I've used statements before, but they're awful. They're really awful.
So, so what you've learned is that this is still incredibly difficult to talk about in a concise way, which is fair, right? This is a very complex practice. And I think maybe also like the history of how this came to the States in the first place. We kind of mentioned the appropriation because of the slave trade hundreds of years ago. So the fact that this is here in America that's problematic in a lot of ways. I just feel like, yeah, there's so much surrounding this practice and like the geography of where you're at that it doesn't surprise me that it's hard to talk about because there's so much that goes into it. Where do you see this work? How do you see this work moving forward? Or, you said you have some ideas for future images that you're going to add to it.
Yeah. So, this specific body is going to continue on. I found that I'm really interested in the concept of the object because the object's very important to the process. Mm-hmm. And so I'm working through my head objects. Like there will be a side project to this work that will be linked where I'm exploring the idea of taking objects that are probably, in some cases repetitive to my research that I found, like things that just continue to come up, but then objects that are very specific to me, and then actually forming them, plating them in silver. And so they become like a physical object that is silver. And there's like this interesting correlation because silver continues to come up in my research.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so like silver keeps coming back. And like, to be fair, these black and white prints were originally supposed to be silver prints. But they're shot digitally. And then my idea was to make them into digital negatives and print them in the darkroom. And because of my job, like I started this work as department chair, and now I'm associate dean, and just time has not allowed me to make it into a darkroom to actually make these prints as silver. Because I do think process is integral to this. And so I think like continuing the idea of like plating objects in silver that are relevant to either me or cause would be an interesting sidebar to this current work.
Do you feel, how do you navigate or negotiate that role as like, when you start making objects, do you still consider yourself or identify as a photographer? Are you just are you multimedia artists? And how do you move through that world?
Carefully, I don't know.
Or does it matter? I mean,
no, I don't think it does matter. And I think
yeah.
that, you know, in the world that we live in now, like specifically our world, I really hate the idea of labels as I'm a photographer
Mm-hmm.
or, you know, I'm a sculptor, I'm a painter. This is what I do. It's like, you know, but like we're more than that these days. And so I think that if we, you know, build up that sort of wall around us, I mean, for some people, it's really important that this is what they do. And so, but that's not how I function. And so like, I've really started to like stick to the term creative because I do work as a photographer on like a part of the work that I do, and that's the documentary work. But I use photography in this case as a vehicle for communication. And so it's communicating ideas. Like it's not specifically, it is a photograph. It's a photograph of something, but like a lot of these photographs are very contrived. Like I created these photographs. These aren't like the color work is an observation of nature, but all of these other things are something that I actually made. And so like I made them happen. And so it's more than a photograph at this point, I think. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that really answers your question or maybe it creates more questions.
No, I mean, I think that's great. I agree that it's not necessarily important to have labels about what kind of medium you work in anymore. And I've just found it's like increasingly frustrating if you're applying to shows and or for grants and they request that you identify with a medium, like you're a medium specific artist. So which is frustrating when you do whatever you need to do to get that idea across. So I was just curious how you kind of felt about that. Do you want to look at any of the Delta Walk work? I'm really kind of curious to see your other work in relationship to this body.
Yeah, of course.
This is
All
just going
right.
to make me hungry.
All right. So here's the backstory on Delta Walk. We're going to show the video too. We're going to see how this works. It's embedded in my site.
All right.
So a few years ago, like many years ago, I was invited to my home institution, my undergraduate institution, to do an exhibition of the Bluesland work. And I noticed that Emily Jones, who is the archivist at the museum at Delta State, they had just gotten a donation for a new museum that's attached to their current archives. That's the Mississippi Delta Chinese Heritage Museum. And I had just come back from I think my second trip to China for work
Mm-hmm.
and like university business. And like we started having these conversations about how within the Mississippi Delta, not unlike what's happening at St. Helena Island, is as, you know, people expand geographically, like an aspect of culture gets lost. And we started talking about like the foodways aspect of the history of the Mississippi Delta Chinese and the impact they had on that greater community. Because the Mississippi Delta Chinese historically were the line between whites and blacks. And so with grocery stores. And so that's why there were so many, and I didn't realize this, there were so many Chinese grocery stores in the Mississippi Delta when I was there. Like I didn't pay attention to that. Like I noticed it, but I just was like, you know, I don't know. I wasn't paying attention to that at that time. And so we started talking about a collaboration of like, well, what happens if, you know, to, you know, garner funding for this museum because this is really important to this area geographically. Like everybody in the South loves a cookbook, man. Like everybody does. I have tons of cookbooks. I think I have more cookbooks than I do photo books. And so we started talking about with Emily about how we need to approach this. So Tim Hodge, again, he comes up again because he seems to be a collaborator of mine on a lot of different things. He doesn't really know it, or maybe he does. He was in graduate school at the time for film. And so I called him and I said, hey, dude, I will help pay your way for this. Why don't you come with me? Let's work on this project and let's see where it goes. So the first year of this was fully funded by myself and Tim. And we have this video, so hopefully the audio will work. Is the video working for everybody?
It sure is.
Well, these ribs been here since 3:15. I'm fixing to take it out now. I marinate, put it in garlic salt.
Oh my God.
Kind of white like smells. That's basically said that salt.
Originally, we had the largest grocery store in Greenville.
But they also had a restaurant.
We had a restaurant, it's lock-in restaurant. We're teaching our children,
Yeah,
our younger
kids.
children how to cook.
Oh my God, those ribs.
So this project, Delta Walk, we've been working on for a really long time. And I mean, it's stalled for a lot of reasons, different reasons. Some of it's time, whether it's my job change, Tim moving on to the things that he's doing. And then like even, funding issues in the Delta. But anyway, so we're moving forward with it. And what we've been doing is we've been collecting, Gabriella Sang and Emily Jones have been collecting recipes from all of the families from the Mississippi Delta. And our goal is to, one, take all of these family recipes and archive them at the Charles Capps Archives as a collection where families can come back and say, I'm looking for, so-and-so's recipe. Do you have it? And we will have it, or they will have it. And so it's this sort of it goes back to foodways and culture and an understanding of place. If we're going to talk about the problems of the place, so Ming Seng's grocery closed after, I think it was 89 years, whereas there's a photo of the inside and Jerome. So 89 years in business, and Jerome is above on the left. 89 years in business, family owned. They lived in and live in the grocery. It closed because Jerome was either stabbed twice because it was robbed. And then it just got to, he and his brother were just like, we can't do this anymore. And so there was actually almost like a protest in the neighborhood by the people in the neighborhood at the people that created the problem for Ming Seng's to close. And so, this is changing. And so the photographs are of the landscape to give, again, context to place, understand the Mississippi Delta. It's farmland, it's impoverished. You've got remnants of these Chinese groceries, what's left of them. But then also we've gone around and we've started interviewing the families, and Tim running video and his partner, Kristen, running audio and doing a lot of the editorial. And Emily doing the interviews. We've started collecting these oral histories around the recipes, understanding the importance of both the garden, the kitchen, the home, the grocery, because the grocery was also the home and the kitchen in some cases. So, and then understanding how Southern cuisine is pretty interesting. It is in and of itself fascinating and how it's used. And so there's been an interesting sort of like families have brought these recipes in some cases from China, from the Guangdong province, which is around Hong Kong. That's where a lot of these families came from originally. But they brought like Chinese vegetables with them, like bitter melon and other things. And so Chinese yard long beans. And so, but it's been interesting for us to sort of explore like a variety of topics of like, how do you sort of acclimate or again, sort of adapt to Southern cuisine? Like, how do you take these ingredients, or you take like the Chinese recipe and take traditionally Southern ingredients and make it into something that's very Mississippi Chinese, and vice versa, like taking, Chinese recipes and adding, American either spins on it, so whether it's barbecue or otherwise. So yeah, so this is the work. And like what's been the most fascinating part is we've been working on this for several years. I think Tim and I did 3 trips to the Delta. Tim did a 4th one because there was a huge shoot that I could not make in Memphis of these 3 families that annually get together. And what they do is they make very traditional family recipes their parents have passed on, but the kids get together from different families, and they spend like 3 days making all of this food that were, traditional family things that they grew up with. And then they share it amongst each other and they go on. So Tim and Kristen and Emily got to like film this. And I'm so sad that I missed it, but yeah. The one of my last trips there, the one thing that we heard a little bit about was race relations.
Mm-hmm.
And at the last one, we met a family whose husband was Mississippi Chinese, and then the wife was white and from the Delta. And they went into like, it was heart-wrenching talking about the problems in the Delta of them being a biracial couple in the Delta. And their kid growing up biracial as well. So there is a lot of like race within this, and, Mississippi specifically, the black versus the white, and then the Chinese in the middle and in between. Yeah.
This is what's dawning on me is that, I've lived in the South for my entire adult life. I wasn't born and raised here, but like the Southern cuisine, it to me is like the identity of Southern cuisine is beginning to look like just a mix of other cultures. Like that identity is not just true American South. The American South is made up of so many different so many other cultures that make it such a rich history. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just seeing that like in the food itself. And I've been to China as well, and by far the most incredible food experience I've ever had. Would go back in a heartbeat. Would only eat Chinese food for the rest of my life if that's like actual Chinese food. How much of this, like your experience of growing up in this, how much of this kind of culture do you think is just embedded in the history of the South and who it is as a region, maybe like the identity of the South?
So I think like this specific work is highly important to the Mississippi Delta, because they were Mississippi Chinese groceries were this sort of middle line where they carried a lot of ingredients that a normal grocery store might not carry. So white families that needed something very specific would go to the grocery to get what they need. Black families at the time weren't allowed to white grocery, so they would go to the Chinese grocery. And so like it's highly important to the history of the place, mm-hmm. because they were like the Mississippi Chinese families were a binder. And so it was really important to them. So, and then even like they brought traditional Chinese cultural events home. Like the image that we're looking at on the top left was a wedding. And I believe it was in Greenwood. And that's a photograph from her wedding. I will say also on the right, if we're talking about like switching things up, those are egg rolls made by Gabriella Sang on the right. But this one is very specific because the right egg roll actually has dark chocolate in it, because Tim and I were filming at Gabriella's home, and she was making egg rolls and talking us through the process for making egg rolls, specifically using Mississippi Chinese barbecue or, pork. Mm-hmm. And then Tim and I took a bite of the pork, and both of us looked at each other and we were like, this needs chocolate.
Did she let you do this?
She did. And like, she was so not against it, or no, she was so against it. And then she said, I actually have dark chocolate. And we're like, done. We have to make an egg roll with dark chocolate and this pork. And so we did. And she was like, yeah, this is good. This is good.
It looks amazing. It's like lunchtime and my stomach is rumbling.
Yeah.
We have a couple minutes left before 1 o'clock hits. Easton, do you want to mention anything else about this work? I mean, this is really a beautiful. Would you consider this ongoing as well, or I mean, it's paused at the moment?
Yeah, it's not finished. I mean, my collaborators and I actually exchanged some texts last night that we're trying to pick this back up again to get it finished, because we've talked to one or two publishers about the work, and there's an interest in this work, and they're starting to get questions about when it's going to be finished so they can purchase the cookbook. Like, our goal was that all proceeds go to the museum. So when it actually is published, none of us are going to make any money off of it, because it's going to all money is going to go back to the museum.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know when it's going to come to fruition. So my goal over the next month or so is to build out like a mock-up of what the cookbook would look like, so I can send it to the publisher.
What a wonderful way to use your resources and your skill set and your talent to basically give back to this community that is such a strong contender for the American South and the Delta. I mean,
so I have to share this.
Yeah.
There are two parts of this that are super strange to me. I'm going to talk about this one because I don't have a lot of time. The gentleman on the bottom right, I grew up as a child going to his restaurant in Jackson, Mississippi, and House of Wong is what it was called. And we would only go for special events and like a birthday or something like that, very traditional Chinese. And I remember going, and I remember having egg foo young. Like, that's what I remember as a kid. And then at one point we just stopped going, and I didn't really know why. And then I go to a family reunion at the Mississippi Delta Chinese Heritage Museum, and I'm sitting next to him, and we're talking, and I introduced myself, and he tells me who he is, and I looked at him and I went, holy shit. You owned House of Wong. Like, I know you. I am, Barbara Neal's grandson. Like, my mom is this, my uncle is this. He was like, oh yeah, I love you. I know your family. Like, I haven't talked to you guys in like 30 years. I'm like, I know, like, I'm 30, whatever. So yeah. So anyway, so he remembered me as a kid. He remembered my uncle and, my parents and grandma. It's like a really weird turn.
Yeah.
It becomes personal inadvertently.
Yeah, well, and again, I think it's important to say, most artists know this, but everything is derivative of, your identity as a person and your experiences, your life experience. That's where it all starts. And so everything is connected. So I love seeing that 360 come back as you're documenting this culture, and then also realizing that you were kind of a part of it from a secondary standpoint. So that's really cool. Yeah, any other details you want to share with us?
I don't know. We didn't get any questions, so it's I'm not sure if I talk too much or we talk too much, but
I think I'm gonna guess that this is just so outside of many people's realms of. I wouldn't know what to ask other than how do you make those egg rolls? Like, I want to make those egg rolls and those ribs. Oh my gosh!
So I've got so I have to show that this smoker was custom made. And it's pretty awesome. Like, it's amazing. And so I haven't gotten to a point where I actually talked to Logan that we need to make a couple of these. Logan Woodall, our colleague.
I've never heard of him.
You don't know him. It's probably a good thing that you don't know him. But but yeah, like, we can do this in this way, in this fashion. And so the gentleman that made this actually used to work for NASA. So he's like, I know this works. I had this made. I custom designed it. I'm like, it's awesome.
Patent it, sign me up. Easton, I love your work, and thank you so much for sharing your process and your ideas with us today and the finished products. I know you're going to continue working on these, and I'm so excited to see where they go from here.
Yeah, me too.
I'm sure. Hey, do you want to plug your social media?
Sure. So For everybody that's watching, thanks for watching.
Yeah, thank you guys for watching.
Pay attention to Edwards Live. We've got more content that's coming weekly. So yeah, I mean, oh, Logan says he wants to make it. He just put a comment in our group. We can make that grill. We can do this, or that
Okay.
smoker. But anyway, yeah. So anybody that's watching, let me actually, how about I stop sharing my screen? We can come back to this.
Hey.
So yeah, thank you.
And you're on Instagram?
I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook.
Selby?
I'm at home.
Like the rest of us.
Like the rest of us. Yeah. So, and then this is my website. It's talboteastonselby.com. It's pretty easy to find. But yeah, so watch Edwards Live. Pay attention to the things that we do. We have some great stuff, great content coming. And other than that, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Easton. And thank you everybody for watching.
Thanks, Alex.
Hey, no
All right.
problem.
Yep. Bye.